Hey guys, welcome back to my sewing room. This is part 2 of making this beautiful crepe wedding dress. If you guys didn't see part 1, make sure to go back and check out the video. This is where we left off in that video. So in today's video, I'll show you guys how to finish off the lining and the cutout pieces. So first we have the lining here, and I'm just sitting on the couch, and I'm going to go ahead and understitch all of the lining, all of the seam allowance over to my lining, and I'm doing this by hand just because I like the hand stitch quality. It kind of gives it more of a couture handmade look on the inside of the gown. So what I'm doing is I'm just understitching the seam allowance, like I said, to the lining layer, and I'm doing that all around the whole gown. Okay, so now it's time to finish off the seam of the godet. So I'm taking my lining and I'm placing it right sides together with the seam allowance of the godet, and I'm going to sew that down. So I'm placing a pin there just to make sure that we're not getting So I'm placing a pin there to make sure we're not getting anything misaligned, and I'm going to line up the notches that we had, and I'm going to place pins all the way down the godet, because when you sew with crepe back satin, it tends to kind of shift just because it's a little bit slippy. So you want to make sure that you're actually using pins. Now I'm sewing that together, and I'm making sure to sew a little bit over the seam line so that we're not seeing the seam line at when we turn everything right side out. Now I'm going to understitch the seam allowance of the godet over to my lining layer so that everything lays nice and flat. And I'm also going to take that over to my ironing table and give that a good press. And I did forget to mention that after I hand stitched down the seam allowance to my lining layer for the whole neckline, I did also take that to the ironing table and give that a good steam on one of my tailor's hems as well. So you want to make sure that you are at this point pressing in between, and you also want to make sure that you're investing in like a good steamer, which I still need to do, so that you can steam your gowns after they're all complete, so that you don't have to take it to the dry cleaners like I keep having to do. Okay, so now that we have everything understitched, this is what it looks like. And there are some puckers there, and those are sewing errors. Those are because I wasn't pulling any tension when I'm sewing those seams. So I need to make sure to correct that next time I make this gown for an order. But I'm going to address my cutout now, and I'm going to address that by using a 1/4 inch elastic. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the dress form, I'm going to baste this close. Now, I tried it with sewing it right sides together and clean finishing this cutout here, and it just did not look right, guys. So I decided to finish it off this way, and I used some really pretty lace, so I think it looks really good on the inside. But I'm going to start by basting this close, and then after we're going to take it to the machine and sew a guideline with the machine. Okay, so I'm over at my machine, and I'm sewing a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then we're going to use this as a guideline to turn in all of the corners of the cutout because I want to make sure that everything is nice and even. And when I hit each corner, like the waistline and the side seams, I'm placing, leaving my needle down and pivoting. This is the only time I would pivot, guys. Every time else, like, I sew right off the edge. But this time I'm actually pivoting because I have reference points to help everything align properly. And now I'm going to go ahead and snip into my quarters. So I'm snipping into the side seams up to the point where I sewed and the waistline seams. And then I'm going to pink down those seams just to make sure that they are not going to fray all crazy on me. Now I'm trying to figure out how I want to attach this. So I decided to attach it from the inside, and I'm going to place a pin right at one of the quarters. And then I'm going to line it up to the next quarter. And then what I did was kind of back it off and take just a little bit out so that there's some tugging there, so there's some easing. And then I'm going to sew that down my machine, and I did this for every quarter. After that was done, I decided to go ahead and finish it off with some lace that's been sitting in my stash for like a year. So I placed the lace. The lace has kind of a line going down the center of it. So I placed that line. I lined that line up with the guideline stitch that we did a little bit earlier, and I pinned all the way around. And I actually ended up snipping into this at each quarter after I did this, just to make sure that it turned in nice and flat. And I sewed this down with no particular seam allowance. I just made sure that I sewed over the guideline that I made previously because I didn't want to see that stitching from the outside. After that was done, I made sure to snip into all of my quarters, and then I've turned everything to the inside, folding that lace over, so it was kind of folded over the seam allowance and folded over everything so you can't see the seam allowance. And then I'm going to hand stitch that down. Now when I hand stitch it down, I make sure to hide my knot, and I stitch closer to the end of the lace just so the lace wasn't going to continue to flip out to the outside of the garment. So I took some time to hand stitch this down. And for a gown that I kind of started to make in 2 days, I actually did a lot of handwork on this gown, and I really find that really relieving, especially when I'm kind of in the mood where I'm working on a lot of different projects at the same time. To actually sit down and do a lot of handwork on a gown was really satisfying. And with that, our base is completed for the most part. So now I'm going to overlay with lace, and I'm using the leftover lace that I have from bridalfabrics.com. No, this video is not sponsored, but I just had lace left over from making my wedding gown. So I am going to go ahead and just use the lace for this. So I kind of figured out where it was stretching at the most, and that is where I am kind of placing it. So I'm placing it instead of vertical how it's supposed to go, I'm placing it horizontal so that the leaves are going from left to right instead of up and down. And I'm just I like to place pins down the middle first because I'm going to pull a lot of tension on either side. And I thought that I recorded this whole process, but I didn't, so don't kill me. But you get the gist of it, right? So we're placing pins down the center, and then I'm pulling on either side to make sure that everything is nice and tight. And please make sure that you don't pull too tight, because that causes puckering at the bottom of the gown where there's no lace, which happened to me, and I had to rip up all of my lace and redo it. So make sure that you're not pulling too tight, but you want to pull tight enough to where it's laying nice and flat. And if you have some areas that don't want to lay nice and flat, you could snip into it and then kind of applique the motif that's over it, kind of over it, so that you can't really tell that you snipped into it. And at this point, I wanted to record a fitting with the model, but we had to reschedule, which is totally fine. So I didn't get a fitting. But what I am going to do in my next video is cover about 50 or 60 buttons. And I'm also going to do the hem and finish off the neckline, and we will be done with this dress. So thank you guys so much for watching my video. I appreciate you guys more than you know, and I'll see you guys in my next one.